let's take a look at the uses of a comma. Commas can give people a lot of grief. So the comma is just a tiny speck on the page, often goes unnoticed, but they're really, really important. And the misuse of the comma is probably one of the most common errors in English. So there are three main ways in which you use a comma. The first way is you can use a comma to make a list. The second thing you can use a comma for is to mark an aside or a parenthetical definition. And the third thing you can use a comma for is to separate sentence clauses, particularly if the sentence is quite long. So here we're using commas in a list. So we say he ordered a pizza with peppers, comma, chorizo, comma, chicken, comma, and mushrooms. Now, if it was just two items, we wouldn't use a comma. So if it was just he ordered a pizza with peppers and chorizo, then there'd be no commas there. But when it's two or more, we have commas. This comma here before the and is known as the Oxford comma. And this is quite controversial. When grammar nerds get into a brawl in bars, it's over this comma here. So some people argue that this comma in this list here is absolutely essential before the and others will say, come down off the stage, there's no need for that, you're being too pedantic. So either is fine, really. My personal preference is for the comma. Here we have another list. She walked to the door, rang the bell, and waited. So she walked to the door, comma, rang the bell, comma, and waited. I have the Oxford comma in there. You could omit it if you wish. The Irish flag is green, comma, white, comma, and orange. So we can use commas to separate items in a list of three or more items. Another thing we can use a comma for is to mark an aside, as I would like to call it. So commas can be used to identify supplemental information, so extra information that isn't an essential part of the sentence. It's just information that's being offered as an aside, a little extra bit. So these are called parenthetical commas. And they're called that actually because you can replace them with brackets, actually, parentheses, and it works just fine. So that they're really doing the job of parentheses there. So here we're saying, my parents, Sam and Mark, live in Dublin. And the main job this sentence is doing is saying that my parents live in Dublin. And then as an aside, do you know what? My parents are called Sam and Mark. But that's not my main point. My main point is that my parents live in Dublin. And so parenthetical commas can be omitted without changing the meaning. And when I say the commas, I mean the whole section that they're wrapping up there. So if you have done the parenthetical commas correctly, you can take out the whole thing and the sentence will still work. So my parents live in Dublin. If when you remove the parenthetical commas and the text that they're marking and the sentence doesn't work properly, then you may have put the commas in the wrong place. Because the parenthetical commas can be omitted without changing the meaning at all of the sentence. Now the sentence may be less informative, but it means the same. So my parents, Sam and Mark, live in Dublin. Okay? So that's the second use of commas. The third use of commas then is to separate sentence clauses. So if the sentence is very long, a comma can give a pause for breath and also help with the legibility. When he finally woke and saw the state of the living room, comma, he realized that it had been a wild night. So here, the main clause here, the main thing this sentence is doing is saying he realized that it had been a wild night. And the preceding clause there is, what we would call a dependent clause. But also, if the sentence is just really, really long, think about where would the natural pause be to take a breath? Where would the natural break be? And that's probably where the comma could go. If this sentence didn't have a comma, I think it would work just fine without the comma. Sometimes the comma is required though. So in this sentence here we say, I read the explanation, comma, but I still don't understand. And here, before the but, the comma is required actually. It's not just a good idea, it's necessary. And when we have words like this, but, however, sometimes because even, you'll need the comma there. Now, restrictive clauses, okay, these are parts of the sentence that are specifying more information about the thing that they're following. They're not separated by commas. So people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. That makes complete sense there. We know what that means. If you live in a glass house, people who live in glass houses, they should not throw stones. If you put commas in there, it changes the meaning of the sentence completely. Now it's saying people should not throw stones. And by the way, did you know that people live in glass houses? So here, the who live in glass houses has become parenthetical. And that gives it a whole different meaning. Because this sentence is the same as just saying people should not throw stones, which is not the same as people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. So you have to be very careful with the commas. It's not just making the text look pretty, it can have a big impact on the meaning. This can be confusing here. So this sentence says, I love my parents, Lady Gaga and Kanye West. Now, does this mean I love my parents, I love Lady Gaga and I love Kanye West? Or does it mean I love my parents and I am the love child of Lady Gaga and Kanye West? There's a big difference in meaning there. This can be solved actually by an Oxford comma there. Now when we say I love my parents, Lady Gaga, comma, and Kanye West, this sentence is totally unambiguous. It means that I love these three things. You could also have rearranged the sentence and said, I love Lady Gaga, Kanye West, and my parents. And then there would have been no confusion either. So sometimes, if a sentence is confusing or ambiguous, you can resolve that just by changing things around and thinking harder about how you might solve the problem. Now, your parents might be disappointed that you didn't put them first, but, at least you're still claiming them as your parents. Here again, we have an example of something that is actually qualifying the noun it follows. But if there are commas thrown about the place, they can become parenthetical. So on the top there, the sentence says, the Germans, comma, who will join the team next week, comma, are excellent volleyball players. So from this top sentence, we can learn two things. We learn that Germans are excellent volleyball players. Like all of them. All of whatever, 70, 80 million of them are excellent volleyball players. And also we learn that there are some Germans who will be joining our team next week. Now, notwithstanding the fact that Germans, most of them may actually be very good volleyball players, that's probably not what we're trying to say. I think what we're trying to say, or what the person who wrote this sentence was trying to say, is that the Germans who are coming to join the team next week, those Germans, and only those Germans, are excellent volleyball players. So the commas here can make a big difference. So this top sentence here is saying that Mozart wrote at least 40 symphonies in G minor, and the 40th one is his best. The sentence underneath, with the commas, is saying that Mozart wrote however many symphonies we don't know, but his 40th symphony is the best. Oh, and by the way, this one happens to be in G minor. So there's a difference there because of the commas. So the in G minor in the top sentence is qualifying the 40th symphony, whereas on the bottom it's just parenthetical. It's just additional information. So one is saying his 40th symphony in G minor is his best. His 42nd symphony in G minor wasn't that good. His 30th symphony in G minor wasn't good at all. Whereas the one underneath is saying Mozart's 40th symphony, the one he wrote after his 39th symphony, is his best. No, it happens to be in G minor. But there's a big difference in meaning there. So it's important to get this right. Another error that people make when writing is that they use commas instead of full stops. So it's not okay to take 5 different sentences and just string them all together with commas into a big long mega sentence. That's just wrong, and it's something that people do quite often. But you need to structure your ideas and your thoughts into discrete packets and express them one at a time. So sentences are separated by full stops, not commas. And a bunch of sentences stuck together with commas and one full stop at the end is actually just wrong. It's not a long sentence, it's not a complicated sentence, it's just wrong. So to recap then, there are 3 uses for a comma. We can make a list and we separate the items in the list with a comma. We mark an aside where we're providing additional information, but it isn't crucial to the sentence, and if we remove it, the sentence will still stand. Or we can separate sentence clauses, particularly if it's a long sentence.